Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first podcast of the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies, along with the Immigration Lab at the Design Institute at American University in Washington, D.C. I am your host, Ernesto Castañeda, Director of the Center and the Lab, and a professor at American University. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me Marshall Plain, who is one of our research assistants, an economist. We have Katheryn Olmos, also to my right, a graduate assistant, a master's student in sociology research and practice, and Joseph Fournier, who is right here behind me, who has been with us for a number of years doing amazing research on the politics of immigration, and we'll talk more about that, and also studying international relations. So we decided to do this first podcast today because of the great work that the team is doing. You will be meeting different members of the team along our series, but we have here three great researchers and myself are speaking to you today because we're filming this on February 20th of 2025, which marks the first 30 days of the second Trump administration. And we have been working really hard at understanding immigration policies, changes to immigration policy, legislature, laws on the books and on the ground, and also the discourse about immigration. And part of our work at the Immigration Lab is to dispel misunderstandings, misperceptions, and try to get the record straight according to what's actually been shown by the data. The Design Institute is a non-partisan institute interested in serious policy analysis, where we bring people from different backgrounds, from both parties and independents, to discuss issues at depth. And today we're discussing immigration. So without further ado, I'm going to go briefly to the 30 years and what I think is the most important about these policies. Then I'm going to have my colleagues here jump in and maybe talk a little bit about something I may have missed in the new developments in the migration field in the last 30 days. And then they're going to briefly tell you about blogs that they have been working on in the last few weeks that you can find in our blog, which is Aula, Classroom in Spanish, or AU, American University LA, Aula, AULA, blog.net. And you can find there our series of blogs that we're going to discuss today and previous blogs on immigration, on Latin America, on Latinos in the US. And you can also find our writings in many places, but also in the Immigration Lab blog, which you just go to theimmigrationlab.org, and then you go there to blog and you will find also their pieces. But we are often quoted by mainstream media in Spanish and in English. So we'll also probably have features coming out in the press in the coming days. And also, if you are working for the press, if you are an independent journalist, feel free to reach out to us to go deeper into the issues we'll touch upon today. And we're happy to talk to the media, to take media queries, and to educate the public when there is an audience and a need. All right, so 30 days that Donald Trump is back into our city of Washington, D.C. A lot has been going on. Let me get started. When Trump again had his inauguration on January 20th of 2025, there were executive orders that were announced that very day. One of them was the one about birthright citizenship. That is the one that we don't have to worry so much about because the courts, at least three judges, have blocked it and stopped it for now. And it's probably going to go up eventually to the Supreme Court. And the indications, the legal precedent and all that will indicate that the Supreme Court should deny it. We have written about this in the blog and spoken about it elsewhere in detail. But basically my line is that you cannot change the Constitution through executive order. The Supreme Court may surprise us. They have done that before with the abortion decision. But everything else being equal, I'm not so much worried about that. Something that happened on the executive orders on January 20th that worries me a lot is that Trump did a number of things in unison at the same time. So first of all, he made a state of emergency, saying that the US is being invaded, and that's the language he has been using in campaign, but also now as a president, that there's an invasion of the US territory and sovereignty by foreign-born actors. At the same time, he brought up the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 that says that when the US is in war or threatened by another country, that they have the right to act in consequence, so to actually act like a third state of emergency, state of war. In the same day, the first day, January 20th, Trump says that he's going to declare organized crime syndicates, such as narco-trafficking groups in Mexico, and organized crime in Venezuela and Central America, Tren de Agua in Venezuela, Mara Salvatrucha in El Salvador, MS Street 18 Gang, and many other groups as terrorist organizations. That was words, that was an executive order. Today, February 20th of 2025, we saw the announcement from the State Department formally, officially naming these organizations as terrorist organizations. What hasn't happened yet is that the US hasn't said that Mexico, Venezuela, El Salvador are states sponsoring terrorist organizations because they allow those organizations to be in their territory. They probably will not do that because of international relations. Everything else into consideration, there is working relationships between the Trump administration and the governments of Mexico, El Salvador, and Venezuela. There's agreements, even if they're not the best of friends. There's agreements where those governments are accepting deportations and other things, so that probably Trump is not going to declare not going to declare war on these states and these governments. He's not going to declare them as sponsors of terrorism. But he has everything else to see these governments and the people from those governments as enemies of the states. Once they enemies of the United States, once they arrive into our borders, because they are claiming, and where is this happening in these first 30 days, that Venezuelans in the US illegally, even if they enter with permission under the humanitarian parole of TPS that is going to not be renewed, or if they already fell out of status, that they are associated in the imagination and more in images that we see in the media, that they are being categorized, most often equivocally or wrongly, as members of Tren de Agua, as criminals, as terrorists now. That same thing, Central Americans, again, equated or compared to gang members, when the majority of the people are escaping from the gangs and coming here to work only. But now they are sent back to gangs that may actually be waiting for them. So again, what Trump is creating is not only a language that is dehumanizing, alienating, of calling immigrants animals, criminals, invaders, but he's creating a legal world, a legal framework where individuals for those countries living in the US can be stripped of their legal rights, of their due process, and in some cases sent to Guantanamo, where they have no rights, when due process can be frozen for a little bit, and where they can be detained for an indefinite amount of time without any criminal charges filed. So that's something that we have seen already in the 30 days. I let my colleagues tell you a little bit more about these developments, but also real quick, for many years when the Biden administration, people equated undocumented migration, migration out of control, migration out of order, a little bit with New York City and people arriving in buses. Marshall will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But most of the emphasis was at the border, right? Was people equated migration with the border. What we see, funny enough, in these first 30 days of the Trump administration is that the discussion and the action has to a big degree moved away from the border, where we're seeing very small number of encounters of people trying to migrate and very few people that can migrate legally now. We don't have the CBP1 app that was allowing some people to come in and start the asylum process. That's not working anymore. That's been discontinued, although it was it was prepared, it was invented or designed under the first Trump administration, but it was used as a tool in the toolbox of the Biden administration. So now it has been phased out. Trump has frozen the arrival of any refugees for 30 days. So today there should be announcements about Whether he's going to continue or not, I haven't heard anything about that. But it's probably going to continue delaying accepting any refugees, which are people that are extremely vetted. There's a great blog by McKinsey in our blog talking about the benefits of refugees and where they are some of the safest people, the most vetted people that can come into the country. So we have no refugees. We have also the stop of the asylum process that was happening through the border to a large degree and through airplanes. Trump has also ended. So at this point, we are seeing very new immigrants coming in, as few as we had during the height of the pandemic. So it's something that if it continues like this, it's going to really impact the labor market in the US in a few months, a few years, because we're going to see no population growth. But at the same time now, we are seeing a lot of the action happening, and Katheryn and others are going to talk about this, about the after effects of the deportation displays that we see by ICE that are not new, but are really being covered by the media, and the government has been distributing a lot of the images of these processes happening to create fear among the population. So the immigration discourse and performance of enforcing the law around immigration has moved to a big degree from the US-Mexico border to everyday American town, to American cities. And even though the Trump administration is not very diplomatic in one sense of the world, they have put a lot of pressure on Mexico, on Costa Rica, on Colombia, even on Venezuela, to let less people leave the country and let less people cross their countries to come to the US-Mexico border. So again, even more than the Biden administration, the attention has moved away of the US towards the Americas for them to do the dirty work or the extradition work or the deportation and removal from within Mexico, Central America, and further into the southern cone. So those are just some of the things that are happening. There's much more that we could talk about what's going on in immigration. But it's mainly that a decrease of rights for people that are from another country, even people that may have papers, because this declaration of enemies of the state, this conflagration of the foreign-born with terrorists, can affect people even who have a visa or who maybe here legally. If they are not legally permanent citizens or legal permanent residents or citizens, they are also at risk of deportation during this administration. Something that was rarely the case in previous administrations. So a decrease of rights, an increase in the rhetoric, but funny enough, in the facts, the deportations, as visible as they are and negative, even Homans and Trump say that the numbers haven't been as high as they wanted. So we're not in new territory towards this so-called mass deportation. We're seeing numbers like the ones we saw with Biden, more from the border, now more from the interior. But with Obama, also from the interior, or with Clinton, who deported record numbers of Mexicans back to Mexico. So a lot of performance, a lot of discourse around being tough on migration, but on practice, deportation numbers are similar. New immigration, legal or illegal, is down. And what it is true that is suffered a lot is the rights of people of color, of people that look like immigrants, and of immigrants themselves. Anything else you want to add, guys, to what I said? Kat?
It feels like, I can't believe it's only been 30 days. It's like we haven't been able to catch our breath.
A lot happening, especially a lot happening on migration. Yes, very active 30 days, so that's why we didn't want to wait anymore until we give you this quick update. Marshall?
Yeah, it feels like 30 years.
Yes.
It really does. Yeah, so about New York City, it's true. It's been in the national media a lot, right? I'm a native of New York my entire life. I have family all over the country. Sometimes when I visit them, they think, wow. They ask me, like, I've heard New York is really getting overrun with a lot of people and there's a lot of crime and all of this. And thankfully now I have not only my own experience of not having seen any significant increase in crime or in seeing that the people who have come here, having talked to a lot of them, right? There's a lot of misunderstandings.
Yes, the official crime rates in New York are actually going down.
Yeah.
And Marshall, Kat, Joey, and others have been interviewing dozens of immigrants in Washington, D.C. and in New York City about their experiences, about why they're here, about their economics. So tell us a little bit more about what we hear often about, let's say, Venezuelans in New York City, why that is not true.
Yeah, so there's a number of things. First of all, a lot of people talk about it being illegal immigration. The majority of people are people who have come using the asylum system, right? That is a legal process that's part of both U.S. and international law, correct?
Correct.
So, they're using a legal process, right? They come to the border, they say, or once they're on U.S. soil, they say that they have a credible fear of not being able to return to their home countries, and they're given a court date, right? To determine whether that's true, whether they can stay here, right? So the first misunderstanding is saying that this is an illegal immigration crisis. The second thing is the idea that this is unprecedented in New York City history, right? I mean, everyone knows New York is a city of immigrants. I mean, like going back to like the 1840s, the Irish potato famine, the city's population doubled in like a decade because of how many people came. But we don't have to go back that far back. Like even in the 1990s, the city's foreign population grew at a higher rate than it currently is. And the city had a higher population of undocumented people back in 2012 than it did in 2022. So people, coming to New York through the border, not a new thing at all. And the third thing is the idea that, we've taken in a bunch of people who are always going to be relying on the state, who can't provide for themselves. It's true that we have a lot of laws that make it harder for people to provide for themselves, and it should be, right? Like people having to wait 6 months to get a work permit after they apply for asylum. We talked to a lot of people who were having trouble with the paperwork involved with that, who had changes of address, and that's the whole process, right? But it's not true that this is like a permanent leash on the state. It couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, New York's had about 225,000 people who have been in the shelter system at some point. Of those, 170,000 have moved out. So more than 3/4, and the number of people in the shelter system is continuing to dwindle. People are integrating into New York City's economy, right? It's taking longer than it would have if we had, more reasonable laws surrounding work. If we had, if we didn't have the housing shortage that we're dealing with now. People are definitely encountering obstacles, but they've encountered a lot of obstacles, right? People crossed 7 countries to get here. People went across the Darien Gap, which is one of the most dangerous places in the world, right? People got extorted on their journey, right? Had to work again in Mexico or in Guatemala, cleaning houses, selling candies, just to pay for their way all the way up to the U.S. So I think that the people who've come to New York are really determined to contribute to our city, to better their lives, and it's really not different from the people who have always been coming to New York. I mean, the city, the service sector economy that we have in the city now is 100% fueled by immigrant labor. And when we look at the numbers, we saw past studies of immigrants who have generally lower education levels, right, who come seeking asylum, and the contributions that they make to both overall tax revenue and to the economy, it's massive, right? And this is both in terms of the value of their labor. It's reflected in the wages they earn, which they go and spend at local businesses. It's also the revenue that businesses are able to generate due to having these workers. And it's the higher productivity of higher skilled workers, right? Who you have so many of in New York, people working in finance or working in tech or whatever, who have higher productivity because they can outsource certain tasks, right? And I don't want to, this is not to say that all asylum seekers have low educational backgrounds. There's many who come from higher education levels, but even if we have the most conservative estimate saying that 50% have less than a high school degree, 50% have only a high school degree, they would be contributing over $862 million a year annually to New York City's economy. And
through the work they do, not only taxes, but the
through the
wealth
work they do,
create.
yeah. And the tax revenue, there will be, it's true that New York City has spent a substantial amount of money on services for asylum seekers, not as much as some media coverage would make it claim. It's about, over the past couple of years, it was $5.4 billion in fiscal years 2023 and 24, and $4.5 billion is budgeted for 2025. But keep in mind, New York has a huge budget, of $112 billion in total the city spends. So spending on asylum seekers makes up about 4.2% of that total. So it will take a while before, in terms of city tax revenue, that revenue, the tax revenue from asylum seekers will compensate for that. But for the federal government, it is pretty much an immediate windfall, right? A much more positive impact. So when Trump claims that he's talked about people coming here being put on Social Security and Medicare and draining those programs, I think he said that during the first debate. Really the opposite is true. That people, they pay their wages into those programs, and oftentimes, in the case of undocumented people, they never see a cent of that, right? So that's a big part of the work we've been doing, is trying to clarify some of the misconceptions that exist around this newest population of New Yorkers. And all I can say is that I hope that they're allowed to build lives in the city and contribute to the city the same way that every previous wave of immigrants has.
Right, Marshall. Yes, and Marshall and company have been doing a great job looking very closely at the budget. And then I think you also find out that the budget allocated for the migrants wasn't always spent, and sometimes it was spent in ways that were not directly to the immigrants but to service providers.
There was some pretty scandalous stuff. The comptroller's office did an audit of spending on asylum seekers, right? Which was Mayor Adams. For context, Mayor Adams declared a state of emergency over this, right? Saying that we need to secure contractors to provide these services more quickly. So that means that the normal rules that the city has in place for competitive bidding, for background checks, for contractors, those didn't apply, right? So a lot of these contracts were issued without competitive bidding and without background checks on who's providing it. A lot of the companies were inexperienced in providing these type of services. So you have cases like, there's this one contractor, SLSCO, which ironically was also contracted to help build the border wall. In New York City, they've been contracted to help manage the shelters where asylum seekers are being housed. Some of the payments to them are very egregious. $201 an hour for off-site managers, $117 an hour for security guards, $140 an hour for on-site managers, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I could go on about this for a long time. We don't have all the time for that. That's not our main focus. But there was another contractor that 80%. They looked at the invoices. 80% of the payments that were delivered to that contractor were unsupported. So for all Mayor Adams' rhetoric about how the city can't afford to sustain these people, I would say that his approach to the crisis, cost-cutting hasn't, the crisis, I should say, in his words, cost-cutting has not really been the top priority.
Fascinating. And then Marshall, Arjun, and myself and others were working on a report that will have all these data spelled out and all these numbers explained. So look forward to it, and we should have a blog published on this very soon. And media, if you want us to write an op-ed on this, please do reach out. Kat, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing about the deportations to Guantanamo?
Yes, so I've actually been exploring a couple cases that I wrote about in my blog. One big one is about Luis Alberto Castillo, who is a Venezuelan man that actually came here through a legal pathway using the CBP-1 app a day before that Trump took away the CBP-1 app. So he came here with his appointment to be processed, and within a day he was, that day he was detained. They were processing him, but while he was there, they started to question his tattoos, saying that he was part of Tren de Agua, which is a Venezuelan gang. But most of the tattoos that they're using to identify gang members are common amongst Americans. Like, I've seen some of tigers, lions, stars, Jordan tattoos. I've seen lots of guys with those kinds of tattoos at any place. But they were questioning about it, and within the day they said they were going to deport him. And he told his family that, but then next day his family heard nothing about him. And his family only found out they sent him to Guantanamo Bay through pictures that was circulating online. But he had no criminal history. He came in through a legal pathway. he didn't even have a chance to actually step foot freely in America. So, and now that it's becoming a big story in the media, they're trying to do something about it, maybe using this big case to fight the Guantanamo Bay detainees, I guess you would say. Then I have been looking at something close from home. There's talk about possibly a Mexican man being held in Guantanamo Bay. This is the story of a man that was detained with 4 other Mexicans outside of a gas station in Orange Park, Florida, which is very close to my hometown, Jacksonville, Florida. And they were on their way to their construction work site, but they were hitting the gas station to grab some breakfast, some snacks. And as soon as they came out, they were detained by ICE. And 4 of them remain detained, and there's one man that they're saying that he was sent to Guantanamo Bay. So we are still confirming it. However, this could be big because they're saying that only Venezuelans are being sent to Guantanamo Bay. And this man also has no criminal history other than, crossing the border to work here. So they are really just sending like possible or current members of the community that are just here to work and seeking the pursuit of, security and like economic security and social security. So that's what I'm seeing. That I'm seeing a lot of impacts on the ground and everyday, like on how people manage their everyday. Immigrants in Florida, they're scared. And they have to check the ICE raid map by the hour to make sure they're not going somewhere that could possibly lead to a deportation, traveling further out to grocery shops, that they make sure that they're not, somewhere that there likely would be ICE or somewhere that ICE has previously been in. I'm hearing that a lot of the Latino, like franchises that depend on Latino consumers are practically empty now. Rosie, a friend of my family, she frequents the Latino club events, and she says that there used to be really long lines to go to the Latino club and bar events, and now they're practically empty. So people are changing their daily life patterns just to, I guess, feel a little safer amongst everything. They only feel safe at home.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you for sharing and for the work you've been doing on this topic. And to conclude, I guess we'll have Joseph talk about the relationship between anti-immigrant campaigns and immigration outcomes. So Joey, tell us a little bit about this work you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So 30 days ago when Trump was inaugurated, I was there. I was downtown, just kind of walking around, and I was really surprised by the level of diversity that I saw. People, wearing Trump attire, people speaking many different languages, Spanish, Mandarin, sort of things. When I'm looking at immigration rhetoric as a determinant of election outcomes, I'm looking at competitive elections, which are those that end within 10% of one another. And the largest category of all of these elections, there's of course 3 categories. There's those that have no sort of anti-immigrant, or of all of these elections, there's those that make no reference to immigration, and that there are those that win within this sort of framework here, and then there are those that lose. And so when we're looking at these 3 categories of these types of elections, the largest ones, the largest group is those that make no reference to immigration at all, or those that make reference and then lose. And so I think what that indicates is that people are very concerned about immigration on a collective scale, on a national scale. But at more local elections, I'm mostly looking at house races, people aren't as motivated by immigration. And I think that's something really important to consider. I think we've all seen the new data about demographic shifts in voting. Even New York City, for example, a lot of very immigrant neighborhoods, went for Trump throughout the Bronx and queens, in ways that we haven't really seen in recent electoral history. And I think that
And even if the Democrats won in those boroughs or neighborhoods, the vote for Trump, the percentage of
the
vote for Trump
percentage
went up.
increased.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, again, if he didn't win, and yeah, I think that's a very new phenomenon that we're seeing, and worth highlighting for sure.
So Joey, are you saying that to be a Republican running for office and having a very anti-immigrant platform for let's say a Congress election doesn't guarantee that you're going to win?
By no means it guarantees it, right? I mean, it very much depends on where you're running. Of course, in certain parts of the country where you'd get more sympathy. But everything that we're seeing indicates that no, I mean, you're actually more likely to lose if you employ this rhetoric, which stands in contrast to what a lot of political pundits are putting forth and the strategists. A lot of people think that you need to go further right on the immigration issue.
Which is definitely the advice the Democrats took in the election.
Exactly, with Harris saying she was going to finish the border wall, things of this nature.
Yes, it's very important work because, as Joseph is saying, the belief is that if the Democrats were weak on migration, they were going to lose, or maybe they lost because of that. But the data that Joseph and Ben and other people at the lab rightly have been looking at is not only for the last elections, 2024, but they also looked at the midterms in 2022, at the presidential election in 2020, and at the midterms in 2018, correct?
Yes.
And looking not at the presidential level, but at the governors, Senate, and House in competitive elections, meaning 10% one party or the other. And that's the trend. So it's consistent through years that most local races actually don't have official immigration position. And in official materials, when they talk about immigration, in the negative, in the last two cycles, those are slightly more likely to lose than the candidates that are more pro-immigrant. There's a correlation between parties where the Democrats tend to be more positive and Republicans being more against migration. But we also have a couple of cases of the same candidate, a Republican woman, for example, running on the same county and changing her stance and her position on migration. And one time being an anti-immigrant campaign, losing, then coming back and running the next cycle, Kim, and being in a more pro-immigrant stance and actually winning in that same county. So I think that's important. So it's a lot of data points and a lot of different years pointing to the conclusions that Joseph was talking about. So again, a lot of fascinating work. It'll be coming out in blogs soon and then follow up in a working paper, because it's something that surprised us, because that's not what we hear in the media. That's not the common knowledge in Washington, D.C., that's what's going on, but it's very important to, because now that we have Trump in power, now 30 days of these terrible immigration policies that affect immigrants, but also affect American citizens that have family members that may be foreign born, and the American economy is going to suffer if we have these mass deportations and we don't have more legal and temporary or flexible immigration. So it's been bad all around, and some Democrats are starting to speak openly about it. The public is very appalled by this. So it's important that when the midterms come and future elections come, that the people that don't agree with these policies feel the need and the freedom, and that they know that it's actually in their advantage to talk openly against these bad immigration positions. But our role here is to inform you in the public about what's really happening with immigrant lives, immigrant policies in the city, on the ground, whether it's Florida or Washington or New York, or data that we can get nationwide, like electoral data. So we're a research think tank based at a university. We're non-partisan. We don't have any funding for this research. So we don't have any conflicts of interest. We're a non-profit, but being based in the university, but we know that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of things said in the public about immigrants that is misleading on purpose, but there's also a lot of things that people believe, not out of a bad will or a bad intention, but just things that they've been hearing over and over again that happen to be false. So that's why we do the work we do. With Karina Sioni, we have this book called Immigration Realities, common misperceptions about migration. You can find it on Amazon independent bookstores, published by Columbia University Press, that goes into detail about some of these myths. We can maybe talk more about that book in the future, but it's something for the audience that wants to learn more. You can follow us on social media as Immigration Lab, Center for Latin American and Latino Studies. SIGN has great programming on campus. And again, the most probably friendly way that you can consume some of this material at your ease is going to aulablog.net, or going to the webpage of the Immigration Lab and going to the blog section, which is the area of the website that we update the most. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being part of this first podcast of the Immigration Lab and Company. And thank you, Katheryn, Marshall, and Joseph, for the great work that you do and for joining me here today. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.